Hi everybody. Greetings from a very cold and misty Cape Town this morning. Ooh, driving out here, you could hardly see your hand in front of your face. But we are safely, and we've got quite a bit of early Rhodesian history to get through. So we'll just get on with it, shall we? Things were not going well in Bulawayo. 1893, it had been a very busy year. That year was drawing to a close now, only a couple of months to go. And Lobengula was a troubled man. He wasn't sleeping well. He was worried. He didn't know who he could trust. He had a combined column of Salisbury horse and Victoria horse moving in from the northeast to the southwest. He had another column under Colonel Gould Adams that was moving up from Tati, and he rather feared that he was going to be caught in a pinches. So he sends for one of the remaining three white men in Bulawayo, James Dawson. Now, James was everybody's servant. It wasn't that he was paid for it. He was actually the storekeeper there, a trader. But if you had something that needed to be done, particularly if it was something complicated, then you sent for James Dawson. He was a man who would just quietly put down what he was doing, hear what you wanted, and then go and do it. An example for all of us of going the extra mile for someone. And so Lobengula sends for Dawson. Now, his nickname was Jim Solo. That's what the Matabele called him, an affectionate nickname. And Lobengula says to Dawson, Jim Solo, please help me out here. I don't know what has happened to Percy Crew. He's gone with my men. I've heard no news. I don't know what's going on. I've got Europeans down to the southwest about to move on to the Mangwe Pass to come and attack me. I've sent 8,000 warriors there. I'm not too sure whether they can hold them back. What I'd like you to do is take some guys. I'm gonna ask you to take my brother Ngubu and two other men. And will you please go down to Tati with them and go and see the colonel and see if you can talk to him. Tell him I don't want war. See what you can do to just diffuse the situation there. Can you do that for me, Jim Solo? So Dawson dutifully takes these three men and he sets out for Tati. And they arrive there at a mining camp. And adjacent to this camp is the colonel's contingent, large military camp. And Dawson walks into the mining camp with these three Matabele warriors, all dressed in their regalia. And lo and behold, who should he meet there but Courtney Salou? Now, they haven't seen each other for a while, and there's quite a lot of catching up that needs to be done. Salou's desperate for news of what's going on in Bulawayo, and Dawson likewise wants a bit of company and wants to talk to him. So Jim Solo looks around and he sees the mining camp foreman there, a fellow by the name of Alfred Taylor. And we'll get back to Alfred in a moment. But he says to him, excuse me, sir, I want to go off with my friend. We're going to go for lunch. And I have these three gentlemen with me. They are ambassadors from King Lobengula. Would you mind just taking care of them? Just keep an eye on them for a while. I'll be back soon. And then, I'll take them off your hands. Could you do that for me? And Taylor says, sure. So Dawson goes off with Salou. Nobody knows where they've gone. They've gone off for lunch. Then the mine manager comes along, Mr. Kirby, and he doesn't like the look of these Matabele. So he sends a message over to the army camp, to the colonel. And he says, would you mind, if you have a moment, just come across over here. I want to show you something that's troubling me a bit. So Gould Adams takes some men and he wanders over to the mining camp. And there he sees these three Matabele. Well, they can't speak English and he can't speak Matabele. So he asks, what are they doing here? And Kirby says, I don't know. Taylor says, some fellow came here and just left them here. So where's this man? We don't know where he is. Okay. The colonel turns to his men, says, take these guys into custody till I can find out what's going on. For all we know, they're spies. We don't know anything about them. So these three men are arrested, and Ngubu has his hands pinned behind him, and they tie him up. They're going to march the three of them over to the army camp now. The other two, when they see this, they get into a panic. They're not going to be tied up. They don't know what's going on. And the whole thing looks very, very suspicious to them. So they bolt. And the one man is shot in the back by a sentry, and he loses his life as a result of that. The other one struggles, and in the process manages to get one of the sentries' bayonet out of the scabbard. And he's about to start swinging wildly with this when somebody hits him from behind with a Martini Henry rifle. The butt hits him on the skull, crushes it in, and he collapses there, dead as well. Terrible situation. And one can understand how it could have happened. It was just one circumstance leading to another. But Ngobo, he stays calm. He doesn't give any resistance. So he's taken off to the army camp, and eventually Dawson is located. Of course, this man he's beside himself when he finds out that two of these people that have been entrusted to him are now dead. They've been killed. And of course they immediately worry what is going to happen when Lobengula hears the news. So they send a cable down to Cape Town. Sir Henry Locke is informed about this, and the man is appalled, absolutely shocked at this development. How on earth is this possible? I mean, do you just shoot prisoners? What is going on? So he hears that Lobengula's brother is still okay, and he says, I want him down here in Cape Town. I want a proper inquiry held into this whole thing and get to the bottom of it. Now, the next day, Gould Adams is supposed to move over into Zambezia with his force, and he intends to keep to his plans. So Ngubu is handed over to Dawson into his custody, and he's told to make his way southwards to Palapia and go and report to John Moffat, and he'll take it from there. So it's not very good. An officer, a senior officer by the name of Sawyer, conducts the inquiry later, and his findings are that this is just it's just something that happened. But one can understand how it came about. But if blame must be apportioned, it must be to Dawson. And he should have gone straight to Gould Adams and explained to him, sir, I've been sent by Lobengula and I have these men with me, and this is the situation. Instead of going off and having lunch with Salou. So that was the findings of the inquiry. Lobengula, in the meantime, he hears nothing. Dawson's gone, no news. Percy's gone, no news. But news does come. And the news that comes is that the Battle of Bembezi has been lost, that his men have been defeated, and that the company troops are now marching on Bulawayo. And indeed it is so. The day after the battle, Forbes rested his men, and the next day they moved on toward a mountain called Ntabazinduna. And there it was that unfortunately two of the three wounded troopers passed away, and they were buried there in the veld. When the column proceeded toward Bulawayo from that point, they came under fire from Matabele warriors on the slopes of Ndabazinduna, and they were quickly silenced. At that point, they heard an enormous explosion, the sound of a detonation coming from the direction of Bulawayo. And Forbes got hold of Burnham, the American scout, and Pete Ingram, the other American scout, and said to them, guys, see if you can make your way over closer to Bulawayo and find out what's going on there, and then come back and report. So these two men did this, eased their way over to Bulawayo, making use of every scrap of cover they could find and every little donga that they could crawl along. And they find that the place is ablaze. 4 places, the town is burning and the people are fleeing. Lobengula is gone. He's given instructions that the magazine there, containing over 2 tons of explosives and ammunition, should be set alight. And this was the sound of the explosion that they had heard. So these 2 American scouts come back to Forbes, and they tell him what's happened. So they get ready to move in to Bulawayo the next day. But late in the evening, Forbes sends out Captain Henry Borrow with a squad of men. Go and see what has happened to the last remaining white inhabitants of that town. Now these men were held more or less captive by Lobengula. Dawson, as I've said, been sent down to Tati, so it was just Usher and Fairbairn who'd been left behind. And they got a message from the king saying, look, so far I've done my level best to protect you guys. But I can't any longer. I'm leaving the city, and it's now going to have to be every man for himself. So I can no longer protect you. Look after yourselves. Do me a favor. Would you just write a little note and give it to the Induna, who has been keeping his eye on you, just saying that I have done my best for you folk. And I wish you luck. And that was the last that they heard of Lobengula. So seeing this town ablaze around them, and people fleeing, and they became quite concerned as to their own safety, particularly when they had heard from Lobengula, I can't protect you any longer. So they took firearms and ammunition and climbed up on the roof of Dawson's store. It was the only building that had a corrugated iron roof, and they thought, well, somehow, with all these embers in the air, at least this place won't easily burn. So we'll just sit here and wait out the night and hope that if we are attacked, we can defend ourselves. And to pass the time, they produced a pack of cards and started playing poker. So sometime after 8, Captain Borrow with his squad come riding into Bulawayo, and there at Dawson's store on the roof they find Usher and Fairbairn playing poker. Well, of course it was a great relief to those 2 gentlemen to be rescued in this way, and they all went into the store, and they had a bit of a celebration there, waited the next day for the column to arrive. The place was ablaze. Bulawayo was burning from end to end, and it's a pity really, because at the Royal Kraal, Lobengula had one large dwelling there that he used almost as a museum, I would say. And people had come over the years, hunters, visitors, and they had brought gifts with them, and he had stored all this. He had had a visit from a group of officers from the English Army. I spoke about this in a previous video, and they had brought with them an almost life-size painting of Queen Victoria, and he was very proud of this, and he kept this in this house. There was a number of other items as well, and all of this was destroyed. It was a great shame really. But in amongst the ruins they found a walking stick that someone had presented him that had been carved from an elephant's tusk, and this was rescued and was duly sent down to Cecil Rhodes as a present. That was all that they recovered from that dwelling. But Lobengula was gone, and when the column moved into Bulawayo, they tried to extinguish the flames as best as they could. It was a bit of a forlorn effort though, and Jameson now had to decide on his next move. So he called a fellow by the name of Jan Grootbroom. Now, Jan used to work for Charles Helm, a missionary that I also spoke about in a previous video. And Jan was a brilliant African scout. Oh, no question about it. The king of African scouts. And he said, Jan, I want you to find Lobengula, and I want you to give him a message because, we have to bring this war to a stop now. There's no point in it continuing. Every time that we've had an engagement, the company troops have come out best by far, and this process will just keep on continuing if they keep on fighting. And the end is that they are just going to lose countless more lives. So please explain that to His Majesty and tell him that we have no intention of harming him in any way. He must please turn around and come back. He's got my word, and he knows me, that he will get full protection. We will look after him. We just want peace between black and white, and we need to have this now. So I'm going to give you time to get there, Jan. And I'm going to give you enough time to explain this to him and for him to think about it. And then please tell him that I'm going to add an extra 2 days to the time. So I'm expecting him back here on a certain day. And if he doesn't come, you must make this very clear to him that I'll have to set out with my troops and go and find him. But we have to stop this war now. And Jameson was right. I mean, the British government had made it clear from the outset, we're not putting a penny in this. So all this money was coming from the company and from Rhodes himself personally. And there was a limit to how much was available. This war could not continue indefinitely. They could lose the war just through not having enough money. So it was imperative to bring it to a stop. And in a way that almost, for want of a better expression, where everybody is the winner. That everybody feels like, look, we've had enough now. Let's just draw a line in the sand and let's just start all over and see where we can find each other. Lobengula had his problems too. Lobengula had big problems. You see, at that time, the Matabele army was in a state of confusion and frustration. The army was estimated to number about 100,000 men. That would be 80,000 spearmen and 20,000 men with firearms. But the problem was that they had no tactics. They had no proper understanding of how to use firearms. Traditionally, and they were an offshoot of the Zulu nation, traditionally the Zulu fought at close quarters with an assegai, which was a short spear. You could throw this thing for a few meters, but that wasn't the real intention. The idea was to get to grips with the enemy and to stab him. It was hand-to-hand combat. But with the arrival of firearms now, the Matabele were not sure. Are they riflemen or are they spearmen? Now, they carried a shield with them, which was about a meter by about half a meter, a bit more, shall we say. And this shield had a bar in the inside, a wooden bar, with some rawhide thongs in it that they would put their arm through. And then there were a number of loops. And in these loops, they would put other weapons. So a man would hold his shield, okay, and he would have what they called a knobkerrie, which is a club hanging on one of the loops. And then with the arrival now of a firearm, the assegai would go in one of the other loops again. So he had a shield now with a knobkerrie, which was quite heavy, plus his assegai hanging from the one arm. Now he had this heavy Martini Henry rifle in most cases. So they would charge, as they normally do, into battle with great ferocity to try and unsettle the enemy. And then about 100, 200 meters away from the front line, they would stop. And now they would, with this arm holding this weight and the hand holding the stock of the weapon, bring it up to the shoulder. And they had this peculiar belief that the more firmer and the more strongly you held and gripped that weapon, the more the effect of the impact of the round would be upon its target. So they would hold this thing up, okay, grip it like mad, suspending this weight from their arm, and then at the same time, I mean, we've all heard the story of how they would put up the rear sight, and this affected the speed of the bullet. The higher it was put up, the faster the bullet was supposed to go. So you had this thing up, the muzzle was now pointing into the sky. You're at 100 or 200 meters away from the enemy. The sights are set at 500 or 600 meters. And you're holding this thing, you're clenching it, you're trying to support this weight on your arm, and now you fire it. Where's the round going to go? It's not going to go anywhere where you intend it to. And this is largely the reason why they were unable to deal with the company troops. Their shooting was atrocious, and it's because their technique was all wrong. But now, the number of Matabele that had actually been engaged with the European forces were a very small proportion of the entire Matabele army. And the rest of the army was looking at this and saying, man, something's wrong here. The company troops are such a small number by comparison, and you people were unable to deal with them. You guys are useless fighters. That's what they were saying to their compatriots, that you're doing something wrong. We need to have a go. And those who had faced the European firepower were arguing differently, and they said, listen, my friends, you're not going to do any better than we've done. Don't tackle them. And this was causing a lot of anger from those who had not been engaged in the fighting thus far. And they said, but you guys are a bunch of cowards. Why are you telling us not to fight with them? Stand aside, man. If you can't do the job, let us do it. So you had these divisions within the army. There were political problems as well, apart from the military aspect. Lobengula was never really accepted widely as their king. Right from the time that he was crowned, there was a dispute over who was the rightful heir to Msilakatsi. And so he, for the sake of peace and for a superficial unity, everybody went along with him. But deep down there were many people who resented his kingship, and they felt he was not the guy. And now with the situation that they were in, they were saying to themselves, Lobengula is the cause of this. This is why we can't defeat the white man. This is why the white men are here in our country, and this is why we are having these problems. He's a useless king. We should never have appointed him in the first place. So you had these political issues. And then you had other issues as well. It's always a danger to generalize. And we can't just say, here were whites who wanted civilization, which was true, by the way, and here there are blacks who didn't want it. It's never that simple. The chief in Duna, just a little bit prior to that, was a man by the name of Lotzi. Now, Lotzi had been sent on a mission many years previously. This was just before Lobengula was crowned, by some of the other Indunas, and they said, look, there's a chap in South Africa who is a son of Msilakatsi. We feel that he should be the king. See if you can go and find him. He was banished here some time ago, but he is alive. See if you can locate him. We should bring him back here and make him king. So Lotzi went off on horseback with a few other Matabele, and they ran into some Boers who asked them what their business was there in South Africa. And Lotzi explained this. And the Boers said, okay, look, there's a problem here. We can't allow you to ride around the countryside armed like this. We don't mind you looking for this man. We understand the importance of what you're trying to do. But can you leave your horses here at a certain farm? We look after them, don't worry. Leave your weapons here too. We'll take care of them. Just go. If you find the man, come back here, we'll give you your stuff and you can go back to your country. And Lotzi always said, we were treated with great kindness by those Europeans. And as a matter of fact, he went and he did locate this man. But the answer he got from him was, you chased me out the country, now you want me back there as king. And Lotzi said, no, it's okay. It's okay, everything's cool. Because he said he knew if he brought this man back, he was going to take his vengeance out on those that had banished him. So let's just leave things the way they are. So whenever Lotzi gave counsel to Lobengula, he would say to him, don't take on the white men. You're not going to be able to defeat them. Don't get involved in a war with them. If they want to come into the country, if they want to mine, if they want to do whatever, let them come. Just make sure that the terms that you give them are to the benefit of the Matabele people. He said, that's all. Otherwise, Lotzi secretly was very pro-white. And he actually wanted to see a Matabele nation transformed more along the lines of what we today would call a Western civilization. And he was quite open about it. And a big debate followed. He was supported by one or two other Indunas, but when they saw the opposition that they came up, these other men, they just kept quiet. But Lotzi didn't. He spoke his mind. And as a result of it, at that meeting, when that was finished, Lobengula had him executed and his family because everybody said that this man was a traitor. Lotzi may have been put to death, but there were many others there who had remained quiet, but who had seen the benefits of changing their ways. They understood that, we can't think that these people are all primitive and stupid and they can't think for themselves. It's not true. So you had this going on as well. You had confusion in the army because of their tactics weren't right. You had political issues as to who should actually be running the show. And you had these other issues, far greater issues, about what sort of a society do we want here in Matabele land when all of this is over. And it got to the point where two Indunas covenanted together. And they said, the best thing is Lobengula needs to be captured. So if the company troops come our way, we're just going to tell our men, don't fight. Let them pass the lines. Let them go past us. Let them capture Lobengula. Let them take the king back to Bulawayo. And that'll be the quickest way to stop this. So there was quite a bit of talk of insurrection in the army. And Lobengula was aware of some of this. He called a meeting while he was on the march northwards. And he said, listen, you guys, I want you to stay with me. The company troops are coming up from Tati. They're coming down from Salisbury. They're going to catch us in the middle. But they're not going to stop when they get to Bulawayo. It is me that they want. So stay with me. We'll march north. When I find an advantageous point where we can engage in battle, then I will tell you to fight them, and we'll make a stand there and take them on. And almost to a man, those Indunas rejected this. And they said, you're a coward, man. You're running away, and you want us to run away with you. We're not going to do that. And he said, just listen to me. We're not running away. The further we get away from their lines of communication, the better it is for us. I will tell you when you can fight. But they didn't want to do that, you see, because there were other things as well. I mean, the rains had just come. It was time to plough. They wanted to be home and start preparing their fields. Okay, they weren't a great agricultural nation like the Shona, for example. But nonetheless, there was grain and stuff that had to be planted. And, I mean, this was the time of the year that they wanted to do this. They didn't want to be miles to the north on the way to the Zambezi River on some nebulous quest of this king who to them very much looked like a man who was already defeated. So they left him. He took a few warriors. There were a couple of regiments that were still loyal to him. And he traveled north. He did send a reply to Jameson though, and when Jameson got the reply, it said, "Yeah, I hear what you say, and I'll come in. I'll turn my wagons around, but I've got nowhere to stay because my house has been burnt down. And also, Dr. Jameson, where are my men? Where are the men that I sent with Percy Crew? And where are the men that I sent with Jim Solo, with Dawson?" Now, Jameson had a problem replying to this. Nobody knew where Percy was. Who knew where Percy was? Percy perhaps knew where he was, provided he was sober. And as for Dawson, I mean, what do you say? Lobengula's already suspicious. Now you must tell him, well, your men are dead. And the other one's down in Cape Town. How does that sound to him? So Jameson just made no reply. There was nothing he could say. So he gave the extra 2 days, though. Lobengula didn't pitch up. And so Forbes was told, look, you better get your guys together and set out after the king. So they left at about 6 o'clock in the evening. It was a miserable night's march. The rain came down, the ground was covered in water, the horses were splashing through this, and they didn't have much rations. You see, there is a certain amount of weight that you can carry, okay? Collectively that a patrol can carry. Now you can have more food, which gives your patrol greater endurance. You can go on for a lot longer, but you must carry less ammunition. So that's going to affect your fighting performance. Or you can take plenty of ammo and less food, which means you can take on bigger numbers of the enemy and give a better account of yourself, but you're going to struggle with a shortage of rations. So, this whole thing had to be balanced all the time. But Forbes reasoned there were plenty of abandoned kraals in the vicinity of Bulawayo. The nation seems to have fled. So the assumption was that they would find sufficient food to sustain themselves. Anyway, they arrive at Inyati Mission. They're going to patrol now between Inyati and another abandoned mission by the name of Shiloh. Now, when they arrived at Inyati, there were about 100 Matabele on the hill nearby, and there was a short, sharp engagement. A good number of them were killed, and the others took to their heels. The patrol found the place had been ransacked. Missionaries had left there some time before. I had said that Reese had taken his family and left. But their belongings were scattered over the veld. Broken furniture, torn books, you name it, everything lying around. So Forbes settled down there for a couple of days, and then they set out cross-graining in the direction of Shiloh, which was about halfway between Bulawayo and Inyati Mission. Now, Shiloh was also an abandoned mission, a bit of a sad story, I think. A missionary had arrived there many years before by the name of Thomas Morgan Thomas, and he had set up the mission station and named it Shiloh. But he struggled terribly. I mean, I said right at the outset of this series that no missionary ever got wealthy there. I mean, these people lived on a pittance, and he had such a paltry stipend to hardly put food on the table. But what he did discover was that amongst the Matabele, quantity was more important than quality. To tell you what I mean is they love to have ostrich feathers as the military decoration. So any warrior worth his salt would want to be resplendent in ostrich feathers. Now, the feathers from Zambezia were of a very good quality compared to the ostrich feathers that one would find 1,000 miles to the south down in South Africa. But this didn't seem to matter with the Matabele. If you could take, and this is what Thomas Morgan Thomas discovered, a handful of Matabele feathers was worth about 4 handfuls of ostrich feathers in South Africa. And so he would trade this. Give me a handful of feathers, I'll give you 2 handfuls of feathers, South African feathers. And there'd be a little bit left over, which he could then exchange for some food and eggs or whatever it was. And it just helped to put a bit of extra food on the table. Nobody was going to get rich doing that. How can you move feathers 1,000 miles and expect to become a millionaire out of it? It was nothing. It was just a little bit extra just to help him along. But when the London Missionary Society heard of this, they didn't like the idea. And he was recalled. And they said to him, "Dear brother, there's something altogether wrong about this. I mean, it's an awful testimony. You were sent there as a missionary, but what's actually happened is now you are a supplier to the Matabele army of their uniforms. And, this is really not on." What they should have said to him was, "Listen, dear brother, we're sorry that you were struggling and that you've had to resort to this kind of thing. How much extra would you need in order to just, to not have to bother doing that kind of trade and just to get on with your work? What can we look around and see that we can find for you?" But they decided instead they would just dismiss him out of hand, which they did. You're fired, in other words. Well, the churches, when they heard about this in the vicinity, they were very unhappy with this heavy-handed approach. And so the hat was passed around, and about £1,000 was collected for Thomas Morgan Thomas. And with this, and with a modest little income that he got from the sale of a book that he had written, he returned to Matabele land, came to Shiloh, spent the last years of his life translating the New Testament into Tsindebele. But he had died now, and he'd passed on, and this place was abandoned. So Forbes was going to patrol between Shiloh and Inyati. See if he could find the spoor of the king, follow him up, and either arrest him or reason with him, but at any rate bring this war to an end. But his hopes of finding food in the abandoned villages came to nothing. There was hardly any food, and it wasn't long before there was muttering in the ranks. And Captain Raff, who had raised a body of men in South Africa and had come up with Gould Adams, he and his men just put their foot down and said to Forbes, "We're not going any further. This is pointless. The men are starving." And so Forbes called a parade out there in the bush, and there were men there from the Bechuanaland Border Police, and they were told, "Listen, you guys are regulars, so you stand fast. You've got nothing to say. You just keep your mouth shut." The rest of the men, who were all volunteers, listen in. And Forbes strode up and down in front of the men, and he said, "All of you with complaints, 1 pace forward." It makes me think of way back, 1962, I was at Llewellyn Barracks, intake number 54. So that gives you some idea of how old I am. And in the evening, the orderly officer and the orderly staff sergeant would walk into the dining room, and the staff would shout out, "Stand still for the orderly officer," and everybody stopped what they were doing. And then the cry would go out, "Any complaints?" And nobody really bothered to complain. But on one occasion I remember somebody timidly putting their hand up and being asked, "What's your complaint?" And he said, "There's too much salt in the food." And the cook, as I remember, was a WO2, and he also had to stand still there while this little thing was performed every night. And the orderly officer said to him, "Cook, did you put too much salt in the food?" "No, sir." And then the staff turned to the men, and he said, There's not too much salt in the food. Any other complaints? Now, Forbes would have done very well there, because that was the sort of attitude he had. He didn't say, those of you who are prepared to continue this patrol, hungry and tired and exhausted, with no food in your stomachs, would you please step forward if you're prepared to go on like that? He turns it the other way around, hoping that he can intimidate these men into standing fast. Rolf steps up with his men, the whole Rolf's Rangers, the whole contingent, as a man, one pace forward. There they stand. They're not going to move. Salisbury Horse, A Troop, they step forward as well. The only ones who stand back, and I don't know, it seems like the people from Fort Victoria were perhaps made of sterner stuff. B Troop stood fast. That's okay. We can continue like this. Let's just get this done with. So Forbes is now faced with a problem, and so they can't continue. And he sends back word to Jameson, who says, "I'll send up in with supplies." So this duly arrives with some extra reinforcements, and they set off after Lobengula. And as they get closer to him, they've now found his spoor. The two American trackers, Pete Ingram and Frederick Bonham, are sent out with a Canadian tracker by the name of Bob Bain and with Jan Grootboom. So the four of them are close on the trail of Lobengula. And Pete Ingram's horse just gives in. I mean, these horses were in a terrible state by this time. And they decide, look, it's dangerous because there's Matabele all around, but he'll have to go back to the column. So he sets off on foot, leading this horse that can barely walk. And Burnham says to the others, look, we've got to rest our mounts as well. So they go down in amongst some bush where they feel that they are, quite well concealed, and they unsaddle the horses. And the moment they had just done that, a group of 20 Matabele warriors just emerge out of the bush and surround them. Now, this was even a surprise to Muhammad. Now, Muhammad, I just need to say, I really get sidetracked a lot as I'm talking. Muhammad was Burnham's horse. Johan Collenbrander gave this horse to Burnham. And it was a magnificent Arabian stallion, hence the name Muhammad. And he was clever, this horse. Burnham says, when that horse died of horse sickness, he said, it broke my heart. He said, I loved that horse. He said, that horse looked after me. He said, that horse was a brilliant bushfighter in its own right. He said, I didn't even have to watch the trees and that. He said, I just need to watch this horse's head, his ears, and his muscles. And when his muscles on his shoulders tensed up and he stopped, I knew the enemy would always be in sight. He said, and I just watch him, and then he'll turn his head and show me where the enemy is. He'll look toward them and bring his ears forward. Well, on this day, even Muhammad was surprised. I suppose he was so tired. Shame. And these Matabele were there. Bob had taken his rifle and put it against a tree next to him as he lifted the saddle off. And the Induna stepped out there and reached out to try and take this rifle. I mean, that's how close they were. They were all within arm's reach of each other. And as he did so, Bob grabbed the weapon, brought it up, and put the muzzle of it under the heart of the Induna. And they just stood there looking at each other. Then Jan Grootboom started yelling at them. Who do you people think you are? Coming here pointing weapons at us. We've been looking for you for weeks now and we can't find you. Now when we find you, you people make us you want to fight. We want to talk. You don't even want to talk. So half of these Matabele just lower their weapons. This is such an authoritative voice from this African man shouting at them that they don't know what to do. But the Induna, who's now got this Martini Henry pressed against his heart, he smiles and he says, no, we can talk. And he takes a little step to one side, and Bob moves with him. And he moves a little bit more, and Bob moves with him. And he can see, man, I'm not getting away from this white guy. And Burnham talks up and he says, listen, just take a look at us. Look at the state that we're in. Look at the state of our horses. We are sick of following you people. Now it's going to be different. Now you're going to follow us. We're going to mount these horses, and you people are going to walk behind us, and we're taking you back to our indunas, to our column, and you sit there and you listen while this man talks to you, and then you go and fetch the king. Do you understand me? And they just keep quiet. They are so intimidated by the way and the forceful way that Burnham and Jan Grootboom are speaking to them, that, they think, well, we better not take a chance here. So Burnham puts his saddle back on, but he watches them all the time. He's got a rifle pointed at them. He gets on, and he gives Muhammad a little touch with his heels, and Muhammad jumps in amongst the group. But of course, Burnham shouting, whoa, 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 as though his horse is out of control. But the horse ain't out of control at all. But this diversion allows Grootboom to get the saddle on his, and then he rides off a little bit, and he covers these enemy warriors. And Bob Bain says to this Induna, I don't want to hear another word out of your mouth. You've already spoken too much, so you keep quiet, step back. And the man did. Bob put his saddle on, mounted up, and he said, now form a line behind me and keep up. And so the three of them set out, supposedly for the column, with this line of 20 Matabele warriors walking behind them. And Bob was turned around in the saddle, and he had this weapon pointed at them, and all the time he said, I told you people to keep up, now move it, keep up. But they were deliberately going a little bit quicker, a little bit quicker, a little bit quicker. And they could see, one by one, at the back of the line, the Matabele were jumping off into the bush, and the line was getting shorter and shorter. But that was the whole intention on the part of the white men. Instead, the Matabele thought they were being so clever. And then lastly, it was just the Induna left, who kept reassuring them, I'm coming, don't worry, I'm coming. And then Bob made as if to look to the front of him. And when he turned around again, that guy was also gone. So they then, sharp right turn, backtracked a little bit away from their trail. They found poor Pete Ingram still struggling back to the column with his horse that was in such a pitiful condition. And so the four of them rode back into camp. Forbes spoke about it later, and he said, this really rattled Burnham. He said, I thought this man was, there was a bit more to him than that, but I could see that he was really unsettled by this experience, which was a bit of an unkind thing to say. I mean, Burnham was a very brave and courageous man. So was Forbes. I mean, Forbes was scared of nothing. But Forbes didn't really reason things out. Forbes didn't even know whether he should be scared or not. But, so it was quite an experience for them. So he says, listen, Forbes said to him, I'm going to have to send you out again. I know you guys haven't rested. I know you chaps are exhausted, but I need more information as to where Lobengula is. You're going to have to go and fetch a prisoner. So Burnham takes Johan Collenbrander with him, and his brother-in-law, Collenbrander's brother-in-law, chap by the name of Mullins. And so the three of them set out, and they find a Matabele herder, a young guy. Looks like he's about 18 or 19 years old. But he's hard case, eh? And they managed to get hold of him. They put a rim, which is a rawhide thong around his neck, and they threaten to choke him if he gives the alarm. And they get him past the other Matabele, get him to one side, and they start questioning him. He doesn't want to talk. They threaten to choke him. He doesn't. He's a very belligerent, bad attitude guy. Anyway, it's all they got. So they take him back to Forbes, and there he opens up. So Collenbrander interrupts the interrogation of this prisoner, and he says, Major Forbes, this man is lying to you, man. We've spoken to him back there. These are stories that he's given you. Because this young guy's saying, no, you know, there's a regiment there and there's another regiment there, but he's lying. Forbes gets upset with Columbrander, and he says to him, listen, do you imagine for a minute that a young man like this would lie to a British officer? So Columbrander just keeps quiet. And as a result of that information, they move closer to the Shangani River. And they've got the river on the one flank and they've got the open bush on the other, which they think is open, but it's surrounded on all sides by Matabele warriors. And so toward nightfall of that day, he decides he's going to send Alan Wilson across the Shangani with some men, just on a scouting expedition to see if the king is there, because he understands that the king is quite close by now. Ooh, I think we ought to stop there, because I've been speaking for quite a while, I think, and we're right on the eve, as it were, of this famous last stand of Alan Wilson. So I think next time we meet, we'll look at that incident and see what actually happened. Folks, thank you very much again for your time and for listening to me. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the kind comments and the things that you say. I'm very grateful and for the opportunity of talking a bit about my country. And I just pray that you all keep well, and that God will watch over you. And until we meet again, take care and stay safe. Cheers.